So I studied a method called somatic experiencing, which is about essentially healing trauma through the body, similar to how an animal will let go of trauma in the wild. It teaches our human bodies to remember that ability. And so it's basically a self-stimulation practice that I lead, typically on Zoom with a group of people. We, just to be very witchy about it, we typically meet on the new moon and the full moon. So basically, I lead people through a self-touch practice that I created. It's essentially a meditation. We are giving ourselves this opportunity to explore our bodies, to explore pleasure. Like, when do we get to do that? So I would say primarily people are receiving an opportunity to relax. And in so doing, relaxation can expand our receiving for whatever you desire. It's like medicine for the body and the being. And you can, again, just sort of relax into awareness rather than fighting awareness, which is what we're taught in so many other settings.
The following podcast contains references to sexual anatomy and sexual experiences for educational purposes. Audience discretion is advised. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Health King's Court, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Health. I have a very wonderful guest with me today. She is the founder and president of Ladybug Productions. With that organization, she offers transformative experiences in the realms of words, movement, self-touch, energy, matchmaking, professional and romantic, yoga, and more. That is a Sara Jane Wellock. Sara Jane, welcome very much to the show. Super happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? Under that Ladybug heading, I do lots of different things in the world. There's a myth that you have to do one thing, and I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either, though we can specialize in certain things. I think the whole concept of holistic health and holistic well-being and holistic lifestyles is always going to involve different avenues and different angles to whatever it is that we get ourselves into, because we can't really spot treat life.
Right.
Life is a little more complex and nuanced than that. But let's start from the very beginning. Ladybug Productions. Is there a significance of the ladybug that drew you into naming your organization that?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's lovely to be here on your podcast. I've been diving into it lately, and I appreciate you. And in terms of Ladybug, yes, it was a nickname for me. And then also, ladybugs are really fierce creatures. So they're tiny and adorable, and people think of them as lucky, which I agree. And they, they're great for gardens. They fight off other pests. They're just really delicate and fierce.
Nice. A bit of a juxtaposition there. That's beautiful. So how long have you been in the area of work that you are in? And that's kind of diverse. So how long have you been working with Ladybug Productions?
Yeah. So I know we're going to give our attention to Caress, and I'm happy to do that. Ladybug and Caress kind of came about around the same time. So I've always been someone that does multiple things simultaneously. So even when I was in the corporate setting or the nonprofit world, I had a full-time corporate role for many years. I always had multiple other things happening on the side. So Ladybug officially came into existence during quarantine. And then Caress followed soon after. So Caress has been in existence for about 3 years. Ladybug houses all these different things that I've explored throughout essentially a lifetime. So I started at a really young age. So when I was in like third grade, I started doing peer mediation. We would put a little armband on our what is this thing on our upper arm?
Yeah.
I sometimes forget body parts, which doesn't work well in my business. But we would put a armband on, and we'd go out on the playground. And when there were conflicts, we were trained to help our peers address conflict. I did this at a very young age, and I became obsessed, which is kind of part of my personality, to be a little OCD. I became obsessed with peaceful coexistence, conflict transformation, social justice. And I legit did that for a career. I started in elementary, middle, high school, began volunteering at a local mediation center, and then it became my career for many years. And there too, even while I was in the mediation world, I was developing other skills simultaneously. So it was very stressful work. I was always in the middle of a battlefield. That's when I began my meditation practice, like 20 years ago. I began doing yoga. I began looking at the body, which is not something a lot of mediators were doing, because I noticed my body would have different reactions when I was in the middle of a conflict. So I studied a method called somatic experiencing, which is about essentially healing trauma through the body, similar to how an animal will let go of trauma in the wild. It teaches our human bodies to remember that ability. So again, I've always been gathering skills throughout my lifetime. And then in, I guess it was 2020, I created Ladybug. And then very soon after, I created Caress in February 3 years ago.
Beautiful. So you've certainly always been a people person, certainly always been someone that wants to see the people around you kind of being well and doing well and not fighting and not stressing and kind of healing themselves. And you found quite the niche, haven't you, of helping people do so. And so let's talk about it. Your parent company is Ladybug, of course, and the sub brand or one of the other companies that you have under that is Caress. And
Yeah.
we've alluded to what's that?
I'm excited. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's all right. And so we've kind of alluded to it and mentioned briefly what you do there. But would you like to give an introduction to Caress and the work that you do there? And we'll kind of dive into it from there.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I tend to get really enthusiastic and sometimes jump in. So Ladybug is the umbrella, and under Ladybug, one of the businesses that I created and that I now disseminate is Caress. And so it's basically a self-stimulation practice that I lead, typically on Zoom with a group of people. And again, it's been in operation for about 3 years. We, just to be very witchy about it, we typically meet on the new moon and the full moon, so at least twice monthly. And then we also have consecutive day practices. So basically, I lead people through a self-touch practice that I created. And it's really beautiful and amazing. It's essentially a meditation. And we, maybe about 6 months ago, we also started including any gender. So it was initially for people with the clitoris only, and now it's essentially open to everybody, depending on the class people desire to take. So it's typically an hour-long practice. Again, I lead people through self-stimulation. To me, like, self-stimulation helps the consciousness go down. So we're diving into deep topics and having a conversation, or I'm leading the meditation, and we're simultaneously self-touching.
Yeah, and so it's certainly no secret that someone's sexuality or sexual health is very tied to their health overall, whether it is their mental health, certainly their emotional health, but even their physical health in other areas of their body as well. Whether that person is a man or a woman, whatever body parts they have, we are sexual beings, and our bodies are sexual beings, and we have sexual energy and fluids and organs that have these complex and beautiful systems that are supposed to be fully operational and fully flowing. And when there's a blockage on that side of things, whether it is at the genitals, whether it is at the brain in relation to the genitals or in relation to the function of those organs or anywhere along the way, there's going to be havoc that's being wreaked on all other aspects and elements of life. And there's no way to separate it. Everyone knows sexual energy is very, very fierce. It's very, very strong. Anyone that's ever felt a strong desire and attraction to be with someone or to, interact with someone or to do anything sexual understands the gravity of sexual energy. And so it's not that far from that comprehension to understand if there's something askew in that realm that it can really mess things up. And so through this practice, we'll talk about like what kind of brought you into this specific niched area of work. But I'd love to know or have our audience know right at the get-go, what are people getting out of this experience? What are people, okay, they are coming, perhaps they're having a good time, a relaxing time, a healing time, whatever. What are people coming away with after they work with you in these sessions?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I like that you used fierce, similar to the ladybug. It is delicate and fierce, our sexuality. Yeah, thank you. So what are people getting from caress? I would say, of course, as is true in anything, different people receive different gifts from the practice. I would say people experience a deeper sense of relaxation, which is not necessarily something we cultivate, not necessarily something we were taught to do much. And here's a perfect opportunity. So you join Caress. I actually built in a 15-minute window in the beginning for anybody to arrive at any point in that first 15 minutes. Because what I realized with Caress, more than any other practice that I lead, people tended to arrive late or, they're, oh, I'm so sorry, and so I really give people that space. So maybe you can sense into it that first 15 minutes, people can arrive leisurely at their own pace. They can have a casual conversation. They can ask any questions. It's an open window. And this kind of eliminated some of that stress people experience when they're running to a meeting or, they might find Caress confronting or they might be nervous about something else in their life. Well, here's a 15-minute opportunity to arrive as they please. So that starts the practice off. And then I always mention, although I'm veering away from this, I always mention that we have very loose roots. If you look these people up, you'll find a lot of controversy. But we have loose roots in the orgasmic meditation model. So that's a partnered meditation practice where one person strokes the other person's clitoris for 15 minutes. And it's a very specific container. So there are parts of that practice I really liked. There are ways that it resonated with me. Again, this is totally different. And this is self-stimulation in communion with your body and with other people. But we have that as a loose root. And then I also always mention at the beginning of Caress that it is inspired by Regina Thomashires quote. And Regina Thomashire is the founder of the School of Womanly Arts. And she's really fabulous. And she says, plan an erotic experience, have an erotic experience, and digest an erotic experience. And so we do that together in Caress. We have a WhatsApp thread where we'll make our plan. As I mentioned, it's often new moon and full moon, but we do other practices as well. And then we have the experience, starting with that 15-minute open window. And then there's always time at the close of the practice or people can contact me directly or speak to each other on the thread for digestion. So people can offer up any frames, reflections, insights from the experience. And then I always also mention that I follow the energy, to which I best credit this organization and this practice and set of tools and techniques called Access Consciousness. Though this is not an official Access Consciousness class. Like if you go to an Access Consciousness class, I think it's unlikely that you'll be stroking your clitoris. But in Caress, I'm informed by Access just because I find their tools and techniques to be super helpful. And all of it is, again, a possibility, an opportunity, an open space to relax, to become more conscious, like conscious of how we're interacting with each other, with ourselves, with our body. How many of us are judging our bodies? Whether it's an ailment, oh man, I did this wrong. Or, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have eaten those, whatever, French fries. Or, oh, I didn't exercise again this week or this month or this year, whatever it is. There's a lot of self-judgment, and that can show up also in our eroticism. And I think, Caress, when you were asking about what are people receiving, I think people are receiving this chance, this possibility to let go of judgment. So there's a clearing in Access Consciousness about a willingness, and we do this as we look at our vulvas in a mirror. I ask, would you be willing to let go of any judgments, conclusions, computations, expectations, projections, rejections, separations, refined judgments, or decisions? So it's really letting go, entering a non-judgmental space, and the judgment typically comes up towards ourselves. So letting go of that. Again, cultivating relaxation. Also expanding receiving. Yeah, it's literally a practice where we spend, I guess, about 45 minutes, because that 15-minute window at the beginning, we spend our time expanding receiving. We are giving ourselves this opportunity to explore our bodies, to explore pleasure. Like, when do we get to do that? Like, there's a lot of exploration, even in the coaching realms, and not to diss coaches. I think coaches are awesome. And yet there is often an exploration of like, what's wrong and what's the problem and where did this go in the wrong direction and what's the root of this? And here we're just like allowing ourselves to have some joy and pleasure and ease with the body. Like, where do you get to do that? And then also this opportunity to share. So we're building communion again with ourselves and with each other. So people share insights, reflections, ideas at the end of the practice, and then again on our thread. So I would say primarily people are receiving an opportunity to relax. And in so doing, relaxation can expand our receiving for whatever you desire. Yeah, maybe you desire a relationship or money or whatever. Yeah, it's when we relax, we're more likely and more able to receive. And it's a non-judgmental space. And when we're speaking of non-judgment, of course, we're not judging each other. But again, I think many of us are more likely to judge ourselves. And here's a chance to explore something different.
Yeah, I think it's, a very often thing that people are their own biggest critic. And that can come from a lot of different places, whether it's, self-fear or self, disappointment or shame or, thoughts that were instilled upon us from other people or traumas that we experienced with other people or from other people. And it's very interesting how you position this in that, like, you're not someone that's claiming, hey, I'm going to teach you this lesson, this lesson, this lesson. I'm going to solve this problem, this problem, this problem. It's, hey, here's a space to come and experience the experience. And whatever someone walks away with is kind of up to them, and it's very kind of personal in the sense that, hey, we're gonna create like a chink in your daily timeline of, like you said, slow down from the hustle bustle here, there, everywhere. Slow down, or take a pause, perhaps from the serving everybody else around you, whether it's your partner, your family, your parents, your whatever, or your boss, or whomever. And this is going to be you being all about you as the consumer, and experiencing love and self-love by via your own hands, and via your own actions. And that right there also creates wonderful patterns of thought and patterns in the mind of, I am worth loving myself. I am worthy of pleasure. I am capable of feeling good by,
Yes.
like, via my own self. I'm not reliant on external factors for my own feeling of self-love and self-worth. And of course, the healing of any traumatic shame around one's own body or sexuality or sexual organs is such an important thing that extrapolates out to everything else in life when we do experience issues in that regard, or when we do heal issues in that regard. And so let's dive into that side of things, because I think a lot of people have broken, or I don't want to use such an aggressive phrase, but unhealthy, or perhaps traumatized relationships with their own sexuality. And we can gender this, or be specific to certain organs based on your area of work, and whatever you'd like to share opinions on. But what is the average state of a either woman or someone in general's relationship with their own sexuality and sexual organs? That would you?
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that question. I'm thinking about Christopher Hughes, who's a really great teacher through that model I mentioned called Access Consciousness. And he's offering one of their first like sex specialty classes. And he has a class called In the Beginning, There Was Sex. I took it recently. It was awesome. And he talked about how, and of course, I imagine you and your listeners are aware, and certainly I was aware before hearing it, but it's a good reminder, and you're alluding, excuse me, to it. But he talked about how sex, sexuality, eroticism is often associated with abuse or trauma. Like that's often a default setting that we end up going into. And yet it can also be, as you also mentioned, this beautiful, expansive, self-adoring practice. And it can elicit different things in different people. I will say, and this was surprising for some people when I was discussing it, when we started inviting guys, so again, now essentially not for every class, but there's certain classes that are totally open. Anyone can join us. And so men started participating. And what I did notice, and this is a tricky topic, and you can totally disregard this or fight me on it, or, I'm not, it's not a fixed point of view and I'm not totally attached to it. But what I noticed in terms of like the energy of the exchange, men seemed especially ashamed of self-touch. Like there was something that was coming up around shame. I'm not supposed to do this. I'm definitely not supposed to do this on a Zoom with other people. It's like shame around self-touch. Have women and other, and I'm sure trans people as well received shame? Yes. And yet I experienced that even more so when I started opening the doors to a broader population. So shame was emerging, and it was really interesting to witness. I mean, it's kind of odd, but the things sometimes in life that can bring us the most pleasure and like joy are the things that society sometimes says are wrong or bad or puts in a very specific rigid category. And if you don't adhere to that rigid category, then all these other issues can arise. And it's like, well, this is a question from Access Consciousness. What else is possible? And how does it get any better than this? And what energy, space, consciousness, choice, magic, mysteries, miracles, power, potency, and possibilities can we and our bodies be? Like, what else is possible in terms of how we view sex, sexuality, self-touch? Like, there's so many beautiful, and you mentioned this as well, there's so many beautiful realms to explore. And again, Dr. Dean, another teacher of mine, was joking and said, like, drinking helps consciousness go down. And I think self-touch helps the consciousness go down. Like, when we're looking at some really cool, interesting, expansive topics and caress, and when we're doing that while self-touching, it's like medicine for the body and the being. And you can, again, just sort of relax into awareness rather than fighting awareness, which is what we're taught in so many other settings, like fighting your own awareness.
Yeah, the experience of a man in society in regards to sexuality is itself such a huge rabbit hole to go down, because at least in Western cultures, most men's and young boys' first sexual experience is being knife raped and having their genitals mutilated as they're strapped to a table, only being a few hours or maybe, a couple of days or a week old. And that, although most men will cope and think that they are fine in an ongoing way, have such deep subconscious and unconscious trauma from their experience that is tucked away and stored away through different coping mechanisms in there, that not only is that experience going to affect them moving forward, but it's also been observed to alter the brain chemistry of those men. And that brain chemistry is in relation to the areas of the brain responsible for forming connections and forming bonds, especially forming bonds with women, as it harms the relationship with their mother, because a young baby, man or woman, only knows mother when they are born. That's the only thing they know. Mother, I'm here in this world. What is this world? Mother will protect me. Well, suddenly she's allowing me to be taken away by strangers and mutilated in such a way. So it wrecks the the bonding experience. It wrecks the logical processing centers of the brains, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, for those areas of the brain to ever actually recover in regards to how they would have been had that experience not been had. But then we got to get into, in such circumstances, the ongoing physical and neurophysical sensations and alterations to the natural male experience when a body has been altered. Now, from there on out, every second of that man's existence is going to be altered in the mind to genitals connection, experiencing the friction, experiencing the different sensations of having an internal organ now made to be external, of having sexual experiences that are dampened and lessened and harmed and hindered via the missing tens of thousands of nerve endings and having the remaining ones calloused over. It's also a massive issue in that, although a male is unconscious of this going on most of the time, the effects still happen. And even if they are unaware of the effects, they're still present. And then this leads to confusion. This leads to a incomplete and unfulfilled internal feeling in regards to sexual relations, which leads or contributes to sexual addiction and perversion and degenerate behavior, because there's like an itch that cannot be scratched in a full orgasm not being reached in the experience of a male. And this causes a male, again, unconsciously or subconsciously, to dive into different things to try to get that fulfillment that has been robbed from them in their experiences. And then we got to tie into, of course, the onslaught of pornographic or perverted materials that are ever present and only ever increasingly present and able to be accessed by young boys as soon as they get their first cell phone or computer or this, that, the other. And simultaneously, we have the demonization that has occurred over the years of testosterone fueled behavior and masculine urges and essence in men. And so men are led to feel shame for wanting to, do whatever they, want to do, whatever might be healthy. And so, yeah. Meanwhile, there's no containers or areas or spaces or little to none areas or spaces or containers for men to be having such conversations. And if they do wish to have these conversations, they're often viewed as perverts or perverse or just sex obsessed, or they kind of get lumped in to the perversion, which of course there is plenty of, and that's very loud as well. So it's hard to differentiate sometimes those looking to study or talk about or understand or comprehend or be into sex in a healthy way versus the degenerate perversion. There's a lot going on from the male side of things.
Thank you for that. That was an interesting exploration. I appreciate that information. And yeah, it's we have to deal with programming and societal points of view in just about everything. And then, of course, our own points of view and our own judgments and how those developed through other means, et cetera, et cetera. And around sex and sexuality and bodies, there's a lot of that. And yet, again, I'm bringing up that question from access consciousness, which can be applied to anything and everything, not just sex and bodies, but what else is truly possible and how does it get any better? Like, what else is possible in terms of tapping into the joy and pleasure and health of self-touch? And we always start and caress with a massage of the thighs. And I always mention this can be your whole practice. Yeah. I mean, just a massage. You can just, give your wrists a massage. They've probably been texting or typing today. Just like give yourself a little massage. How many times do we give ourselves permission to do this? So starting with a massage of the thighs and caress, and that can be somebody's entire practice, and or they can dive into those other areas of the body, which, yes, as you mentioned, it's debatable how many nerve endings. I know there was debate about how many clitoral nerve endings. I hear you about other nerve endings and how they were essentially probably destroyed through that surgery. We know that there are a lot of nerve endings and that we can tap into them, and it can bring pleasure and health to the body. And yet we're not always choosing that as an option, or if and when we do, sometimes we're choosing it from shame or judgment. And what if we choose it from communion with ourselves and in caress with, a group of other practitioners?
Yeah, and it is really such a shame that, these conversations aren't had as much as they really ought to be, because nothing in life is meant to be ignored. Ignoring anything only allows it to get worse, or ignoring anything doesn't make it better. It's not a healthy way to go about anything. Whether it's our relationship with other people, whether it's our car, we have to make sure we're maintaining that. Whether it's your house, you got to maintain that. Or whether it's any part of our body. All of our body parts are meant to be receiving work and receiving attention and receiving stimulation in different and healthy ways. And it's a very interesting culture that we, have found ourselves in, where those explorations and those bits of work have been so forgotten. But if you look at other cultures going in a historical sense or an ancient sense or even a current sense, body work in whatever capacity is part of the culture and is not just a behind closed doors thing. It's a public and communal thing. You have what? Russian bathhouses, you
Yeah.
have Chinese shiatsu, you have like all these different ancient experiences that all involve physical release and physical either manipulation or conditional like conditions of just purging the body of pent up energy and just making sure everything's flowing and moving. This isn't a new concept. This is understood throughout time. But in our current world, especially the current Western world, where all the or where sexuality has simultaneously been suppressed in its beautiful and sacred way while also being glamorized and glorified and pushed out in the degenerate way, it's such a lost it's such a lost experience, unfortunately, and to the detriment of everybody, men and women alike, when we aren't comprehending the importance of maintaining our body and maintaining our body parts. Like you said, when's the last time most people have even just like massaged their arm, let alone their thigh, let alone their genitals in a hey, I'm gonna like I need some healing work. I need to stimulate blood flow. I need to get that chi flowing. Like it's not necessarily a sexual thing. It's a I am a healthy or I am a human being that needs to be healthy thing. It's an interesting differentiation there.
Yeah, I had a friend that said once I was stressing out, it was probably like 20 something years ago. And he was like, go give yourself a bath and a foot massage. And it was like, he's like, if everybody just took time for baths and foot massages. And he had a point. Like that was one of those things that just kind of locked in my brain because it's something many of us, most of us have hands and we can touch ourselves. And yet, I know even for me, when something shows up in the body, if I have some pain or ailment, I'm like, oh no, what's wrong? And that's my, again, default setting. And then I look and I think, well, what else is possible? How's it getting better? Does this require a little self-touch? Do I get to go get a massage? Am I going to go work out? I had mentioned to you, I'm enjoying going to the pool lately. Do I get to like dive into a body of water? Do I need a shower, a bath, or a foot massage? Like, what if we didn't default to pain or ailments or any of our body's awarenesses as bad or wrong and push them away? And what if we were more open in a state, and this is also from access consciousness, in a state of allowance, like, oh, thank you, body, for that information. What are you communicating? How can I best help you out? And I know for me, erotic self-touch is a contribution, and it does give me more ease. Like when I start off my day with a caress session, I'm more at ease, throughout my day, throughout my week. When I practice the consecutive day opportunity, even more so, it's so expansive. And I'm actually considering, it's coming up soon. May is National Masturbation Month. So I'm considering for any of your listeners or anyone else, who's tapping into this podcast or who comes across caress, I'm considering a 31-day self-touch practice through caress for National Masturbation Month. You heard it here first, May 2024. We've done consecutive day practices and they've been such a contribution. And so, yeah, I'm looking at one coming up in about a month.
That's awesome. Sorry, a window opened on my computer for some video started playing. But yeah, there's a lot of there's so much nuance to go into here because for someone that hasn't ever explored the realm of sexual healing and or healing in the genitals or in the mind or in the sexuality, it's very easy for this all to just sound like degenerate, a bunch of people wanting to masturbate. So I'm really trying to nuance the conversation in the way that makes it digestible and comprehensible to people. And another way to do that is to kind of look at the design of our bodies. And even this is going to be out there for people. But something that a lot of people have heard of is reflexology and reflexology points. And this is something that is just so beautiful in regards to the way our bodies are divinely created, in the sense that all of our organs and body parts are connected to other areas of the body. And in this way, we have checks and balances, and we have ways to kind of help other areas of the body if one of them is kind of needing some help. And the most common practice of reflexology is generally the hands. So, massaging certain areas of the hands will actually help stimulate the blood flow and the lymphatic fluid movement and what have you to different parts of the body, whether it's other internal or external organs. There's also reflexology points on the feet, and every toe and every area of the pad of the foot has reflexology points. The ears have very many reflexology points within them, very complex systems in the ear, very, very interesting stuff. But also, our genitals are no different. And whether you are a man or a woman, there's different reflexology points on the genitals where stimulation to that area specifically gets blood flowing and life force flowing and chi flowing, or whatever you want to call it, flowing and moving, and stimulates the health of other areas of the body, your heart, your lungs, your pancreas, your spleen. All of these are built in reflexology points of the genital region. And so that kind of helps bridge the divide between looking at these practices of self-touch and erotic self-touch as just degenerate pleasure behavior, which, and again, not that pleasure itself is directly tied to degeneracy. Quite the opposite. It could be a beautiful and wonderful thing, a necessary thing. But it helps kind of, perhaps for anyone that's struggling to grasp the concept of where does the healing come into play. There's physical ties and physical, like, observable ways where stimulating those areas can help and assist the other organs of the body. And so this is a medical kind of practice that we're talking about here, isn't it?
Sure. And I think I like what you said, that someone who's just popping in to listen might have a certain point of view about what we're discussing. And I always mention in an announcement about caress, like, beginners and advanced practitioners always welcome, meaning, like, there have been people who have been practicing caress since its inception about 3 years ago. And then there are people that are brand new to the scene. Everyone's welcome. It's not required that you have specific experience, with massage or being massaged or anything, any area. It's designed to welcome anyone of age that's interested in relaxation, receiving, letting go of judgment, especially of ourselves, recognizing bodily sensations not as wrong or bad, but as information. And I like what you said earlier too about this tendency. I had mentioned, we echoed each other around the tendency to ignore awareness when actually information is very useful. And anywhere we're willing to give our attention, it expands, it grows, it's nurtured. Whereas when we ignore things, what's that expression about it can be a whisper and then it can become a scream, you know what I mean? So if we're just taking this time to listen to the body, to massage the thighs, to pay attention to our breathing, just like any meditation. To me, it is time well spent. And then adding the eroticism without a point of view that eroticism is wrong or bad. In fact, the idea that eroticism, as you mentioned, can be beautiful, expansive, wonderful, pleasurable. Like, it's very different than what we learn. And yet to me, it's been such a profound exploration. And when you were asking very early on about what people are getting, I've also received a lot from the practice personally. And that's part of the reason why I've kept going, because I'm like, wow, there really is something to this. There really is something to the practice of being in communion with your body, in communion with other people, and taking the time out to give yourself that attention. I've really grown and expanded and transformed through the caress practice. And of course, I've heard from countless others about their experiences as well, whether it's letting go of shame or viewing eroticism differently, or just taking a minute to listen to the body. It's different and unique, and sure, I think it could probably receive some criticism. And yet, like I said, it's been really amazing for me and countless others. And I invite anyone that's interested and of age to the practice.
Yeah. And so I want to get back to one of the really important questions that I posed earlier, and we didn't necessarily get to hear half of the side of the answer. I touched upon perhaps where a lot of the shame in men regarding their sexuality is coming from, but I'd love to hear you expand on where is it coming from for women?
Yeah, I mean, women come with their own set of complex concerns around sex, sexuality, bodies as well. I think we all do. We've all grown up in one society or another, and many of us didn't get a very expansive or even educated approach in our upbringing around body and eroticism. I know for me, so I'm 47. For me, like, growing up I was like in high school in the 90s, and my quote unquote sex education was like, if you have sex, you're going to die. You're going to die of AIDS. It was like such a stressful quote unquote education. And this is something totally different. So yeah, of course, women come through our virtual doors or curtains with their own shame, with their own trauma, with abuse, either of their own bodies or, through someone else, with their own concerns about relating to others, etc. It's present in so many of us. And yet I do see a glimmer of other possibilities and other ways of cultivating a more relaxed state of allowance with our own bodies, our own eroticism, our own erotic expression, whether it's with ourselves or other beings. I really truly believe that there's something else possible. And that's what I'm sort of expressing, promoting, wishing was more available to more people. Women talk about shame, definitely. Women talk about judgment of their bodies. I think of myself as too fat, or, I didn't even ever look at my vulva. That's another thing. Like, we have so many different names for genitals. And the vulva is the front facing portion of a woman, and often it's just mischaracterized as vagina, which is the canal. And so many women were not taught to take a look. So they didn't even see what's going on. And in caress, as I mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity to look and to look without judgment, if possible, and to look and explore. I mean, I've had people in caress, we typically have a hand mirror at the beginning of the practice, take a look. I mentioned without judgment, conclusion, computation, etc. Some women look throughout the practice just as a way of exploring their own bodies and their own awareness. Again, that could seem sort of confronting or shocking, and yet it's just our own body's expression. It's totally natural and can be very beautiful and very informative. I feel like a little like I'm being a broken record, am I? Because I keep kind of saying the same things, but they're not things we might be used to hearing.
Yeah, certainly. And a universal theme that if I'm a bit of a broken record now is that where attention goes, energy flows. And when we not only never look at something or check on something, well, how can we ever, ensure that it's in a healthy state or form a healthy relationship with it and with, that part of ourselves? And it's simultaneously funny, but also sad how many people don't even understand the right name of it's such a common thing.
I've heard so many different names.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's a good point of the dancing around of sexuality and getting to the point of anatomy. The common thing that's done, especially for children, is to just use these euphemistic words. But even in doing so, that creates a disconnection right there from
it's not very
anatomy.
precise, right?
What's that?
Not very precise.
Yeah, exactly. And every, culture or area has their own little, or family has their own little euphemism that they, put towards the genitals of men and women. And both of those, they just serve as points of confusion. They don't really help anything. And then it plants just weird mental seeds of, this is something we can't talk about, shouldn't talk about this and that. And we don't want kids just running around talking about their genitals all the time, but there's no reason to not teach healthy comprehension of, yes, that is what this is called.
Correct. Yeah, it's pretty basic and fundamental. And yet, like you mentioned, another area that we tend to avoid, or that people who are supposed to be educating us may avoid. And yeah, what is that? And what I know I'm saying it over and over, but what else is possible? What if we clearly identified our body parts? We looked at them. We didn't overreact when something goes awry. When our body's giving us information. Oh, thank you, body. Let me check that out. It's a different way of being in the world and with the body. I did this whole riff once on dis-ease and how so much of us have disease, and it can lead to actual physical problems. And what if we just moved into the ease and we didn't judge our bodies to the extreme degree that we judge and misidentify our bodies?
Yeah. And we've mentioned, of course, and it's no secret that the sexual education that children receive in public education or otherwise is more or less abysmal and damaging and harmful, whether, it was in the 90s or the 2000s, and God help what's going on now. But what do you think, and perhaps you don't have a perfect answer for this, but if you had to kind of describe what you may think is a healthy way to introduce children to anatomy and sexuality. Not that we are sexualizing children, but just teaching them this is the way the world works, this is the way bodies work. Do you have any key like concepts or elements or things that you kind of advocate for in sex education?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question before. And yet, in one of the other things that I do in the world, I work directly with young people. So it has nothing to do with press. And so far, so good. Those worlds have not overlapped. And I've taken it upon myself to attempt to prevent overlap of those worlds. Not that I'm doing anything wrong or bad, right? In press, but there is so much stigma. But yes, I work with young people in another setting. And yes, I had my own experiences, as many of us have had, in, like you said, the public education school system, where I just remember those horrific images and those ideas like that we are going, you're going to die as soon as the penis enters the vagina or whatever you're choosing in your world, death will strike upon you. It was so horrifying to me. And yet then we were also simultaneously working with all our hormones and desires. So that didn't really work well for me personally. I wonder if it works well for anybody, and hopefully it's improved, but I'm certainly not sure about that. I think, being a relaxed and receptive guide for young people. So again, not necessarily introducing the topic, but when a young person has a question, if we're able to respond to them with openness, with education, with precision about body parts and functionality, like we've been saying throughout, it seems like a theme of our conversation. If we're willing to take a look, especially when a youngster has a question, rather than ignore or, resist and react with hyperbole around disease or teen pregnancy or all the things youngsters hear about, what if we taught young people, like, yes, this is a beautiful way to express yourself, which you can explore as you enter into your adulthood, and it's not wrong or bad. There were so many messages, and probably there continue to be, about wrongness and badness and all the problems that are going to come from sex. And there's so much else to explore. There's, like you mentioned, health and vitality. I notice I'm more generative in my life when I'm feeding a healthy, erotic energy. Like, what if we were able to let down some of those rigid walls and barriers and resistance reaction around eroticism, and just have a sense of allowance or openness, rather than oh no, it's wrong, it's bad, I can't look. And of course there's probably a delicate way to do this with young people, but I imagine it's possible, and I imagine it's different than what they're used to receiving. Hopefully it's improved since I was in high school, but I'm not sure it has. I mean, there are all those statistics now about younger people having less sexual engagement because they're so, like, phone oriented, device oriented, social media oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I have you heard that? I don't know if that's.
I think there's perhaps kind of both directions going on at the same time. Yeah, where people are more involved in their phones, they're less likely to have in-person experiences where that's even a possibility, where, but the genders are not interacting as much in person and kind of getting that, I guess, practice and even talking to each other, let alone interacting with each other in any way, healthy or unhealthy, sexually. But then, even though people are getting more on technology and away from in-person interactions as a whole, we've seen the hyper-sexualization and promotion of all sorts of degenerate behaviors and the rise of over-casual sexual encounters being, looked at as no big deal, and really the kind of sex all the time, sex, whoever, it's no big deal. It's not that important because all of the ramifications have kind of been destigmatized or mitigated through interventions like birth control pills and IV, implants and all these different things, Plan B pills, abortions, all these different things have kind of taken away the kind of need to stop and think twice before engaging in behaviors. And now we've seen the kind of over correction, if you will, or over, change. I don't even want to call it a correction, in going from, ooh, like no sex, you're going to die, to I've seen children's books talking about like urine play and blood play and anal sex in that on recommended reading lists in schools, and that's certainly not a healthy thing, I would say, either. And so there's kind of both things going on, both the extremes going on, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, for me, when I work with young people, I attempt to be a resource for them. I give students in a program where I work my cell phone. I say, you can reach out to me anytime, because I know, like, when you're young and quote unquote dumb, you might make some interesting choices. And sometimes it could be helpful to have the feedback from an adult. And yet, if adults don't have that stuff sorted, which is often the case, what are we feeding young people?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of the whole basis of the practice. It's like, and it's almost like cue the eye roll when you talk about self-love or self-adoration. And yet it is so freaking beneficial and generative when you can cultivate that way of being with yourself. And then it does transcend the self, then when you have that kind of communion with you and your body, you can bring it to your partnerships, you can bring it to your work, you can bring it to, if you have children, etc. Like, I think, again, cue the eye roll in terms of, like, everybody says it, it's almost a cliche about starting with yourself. And yet we all say it because it's got accuracy. Like, when we can be present with ourselves, when we can listen in, when we can look and listen to the body without judgment or conclusion, when we can offer up some self-touch for relaxation, calming, expansion, non-judgment, it impacts every aspect of one's life.
Yeah, you really nailed it in the sense of, it's kind of one of those examples of cyclical, generational kind of things going awry, where, over different generations, many people's relationship with sex and their family's relationship with sex, their parents' relationship with sex, amongst themselves or amongst the relationship or in the household, is just all weird and muddied and strange. And how can we ever expect any sort of young person to get a good grasp on anything if their example, their biological example, their at-home example is in a state of chaos? And that's why it's certainly essential to break that cycle of, just confusion and chaos before we pass unhealthy behaviors or thought patterns onto the next generation. And it's just such a weird one. It's such a strange kind of thing to how do we get this right, And it's like the standard is for parents to kind of act like sex and sexuality doesn't exist at all when they have children. And it's like, oh, we can't have relations when the children are, we have to wait till they're asleep and they can't hear it and they're not home. And it's like, is that the right thing?
And yet, how did the children get here?
It's so strange, right? It's like, is it inherently damaging for a young child or adolescent or whatever to know, my parents are having sex or making love? Is that damaging inherently? Maybe it's weird because of social stigma. Is it a positive thing if, oh, my parents are in a loving relationship and they engage? It's, how do we go about that? It's so strange. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, should sex be like something that doesn't exist amongst their parents in a child's mind, or how does that even get introduced?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I would be curious from your parental, from your listeners, any parents, and how they work with that. And I'm trying to recall this woman's name with whom I talked. I was talking with her about caress, and she was talking about the work. I'll maybe get that to you so you can have it in your reference materials for our podcast sesh. She works directly with young people and works with professionals that work with young people to have a better, healthier relationship to sex as you're growing up. So I'll definitely get you her information, and she's probably more of an expert than I am on that topic. But what's coming to me is this idea from Access Consciousness, which I've sort of referenced. Wherever we're in strong alignment or agreement and or resistance and reaction, we sort of become the effect of the thing. So I think if we're if we're overexposing our children to our own sex life with ourselves or another, they're co-parenting or what have you, it could be intense, right? But if we're resisting and reacting and we're not listening to ourselves or our children, that doesn't really promote a healthy engagement either. I think it's that, the Buddha called it the middle way, or Access Consciousness would call it a state of allowance. Being present with whatever's coming up without that strong resistance and reaction or the strong alignment and agreement. It's just like, oh, interesting. What's this? And how do I best proceed with this? And, I'm not so uptight with myself that I can't tap into my own awareness, or I'm not so uptight in my partnership that I can't tap into their wisdom. And I'm not so uptight with my child where I can't engage openly with them, that we're able to ask questions and have a level of ease in engaging. I think that would be helpful rather than the resistance or the overindulgence.
Yeah, of course. All things taken to extremes can get healthy, can get unhealthy rather. And there's so much weird gray area to explore in trying to get something right. And it's hard to come out with a right answer on the other side of things, especially when something is such a essential and important yet taboo and beautiful yet corrupted thing, such as sex in the modern world. It's very, very strange, and there's a lot of factors going on. But enough about raising the next generation. Let's talk about people that are already here and already adults. Is there any other sides to your practice and work that we haven't touched on yet that you kind of like to dig into?
I don't know if there's anything else about caress specifically. I mean, I'd be curious. Do your listeners typically engage? Like, I'd be curious, like, comment, share, interact. I'll be happy to respond to any questions,
Yeah.
people can reach me on my site directly. I'd be curious about feedback or questions from your audience, and I'd be happy to come back if there's more to explore in that topic. And people are, of course, welcome to join a caress session or join us for this 31 days in May. There are all the other things that I offer through Ladybug, and they are intertwined. I think for most of us, as we were talking way in the beginning of our conversation, that different aspects of our life tend to inform each other. So that's certainly true. This is one thing that I offer. And then I offer many other opportunities or possibilities for people to explore. Do you have other questions or curiosities about caress? Is there anything I didn't quote unquote touch on? I recently did. I don't know if I sent it to you. I recently was at the Comedy Cellar and I did a 5-minute set. And I talked about caress.
How'd that go?
And it was fun. It was a blast. So I can send that to you too if you want to post that.
Yeah, and to respond to your question about audience engagement, right now there's only 11 episodes published, and I get a couple hundred views across the different platforms. By the time this episode is aired, it will be episode like 31 or 30 or something like that. So I'm hoping to build more audience engagement between now and then. So I absolutely do always encourage everyone to comment and share what you thought, or share what questions you have, or share what you liked, or share what you've hated. Or disagreed with in any of the conversations we've had today, because there's likely to be someone in all of those categories, right?
Totally. Yeah, I know they always say like, comment, share, subscribe. Like, I appreciate people's engagement. I would appreciate people's questions, or if you have a totally different point of view, I'd be curious to hear about it. Or if people are curious to hear more about caress. I know, like, for some people, I've had like a few people tell me, like one guy told me, just knowing this exists has expanded my world. And another person told me, Sara Jane, I will never attend caress, but I'm glad it exists in the world. And there are people that may never end up in a caress setting, or they say that now. Who knows what will happen in the future? But just that it exists can be a contribution. And then, of course, for anyone that's interested, I offer a free, introductory conversation. Anyone can reach out to me and we can talk about the practice. I do my best to set people up so they know what they're getting into. And then again, we have the communal aspect where people can engage on a thread together.
Yeah. And so I could certainly understand why someone might understand the power of, this type of work on a personal level, but not want to necessarily engage in a group setting or, put themselves out there like that. And so to clarify that, how are people putting themselves out there when they are on these sessions? Is it an anonymous thing that people just tune in and listen to? Is anyone on camera? Are people just talking verbally? Is it an audio call? What's the format of these calls? What's going on?
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, and so people are also aware, and you'll see it on my site. Like you can ask me about partnered practices. You can ask me about private sessions. Most frequently, we offer the group caress practice. And so, yes, as I mentioned, that first 15-minute window, then I always state the little introduction, base loose roots in orgasmic meditation, Regina Thomashire's instruction, and some influence from access consciousness. And then usually I just guide people through the practice. You can be on or off camera, on or off mute. And then, as I also mentioned, at the close, there's an opportunity or a possibility for a conversation. So people can offer any insights, frames, reflections. I would say for the most part, people tend to be off camera, but not always. Tend to be on mute, but not always. And then typically people emerge at the end of the practice to share their experience. But it varies. I think when we do the consecutive day practices, people tend to get to know each other better and come on camera or off mute. There was something else I was going to mention that I might now be missing. Was there another component of that question that I didn't tend to?
No, that was at least the essentials of it as far as I remember. But something I want to ask as well is you kind of started to touch upon it, but I'd love to hear some of the like success stories, if you will. And you said some people have said this is like life changing, or like what's been like the crazy like transformations or positive impacts that you've heard from people that have gone through this experience, and so people can kind of hear like, maybe I could have something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wide range. So it's anywhere from, like I mentioned, the people that say, like, I would never do this, but just knowing it exists has expanded my reality or my awareness. Or there was somebody that revealed that he began touching himself just knowing caress existed, that he had so much shame around self-touch and therefore did not self-touch. Found out that this whole other reality exists in the universe, and he was able to self-touch. So I've heard those kinds of stories. And then people who actually participate, some very frequently, some in the consecutive day practices, just ideas about receiving more, receiving desire, communing with other people, communing with themselves. There's a pretty consistent feedback about like, oh, I wish I could just do this for myself, but I don't always just take the time, especially a full hour. Like people maybe will rush something or say, oh yeah, I should give myself attention, but they may not actually take the time. And caress is sort of a beautiful combination of eroticism and essentially a meditative state. And people don't necessarily combine those experiences. And caress enables people to do that. I know for me, I got a pre-cancer diagnosis, which I believe changed through many different practices that I employ. Access consciousness, caress, some interesting dietary choices. So that totally went away. I attribute that to caress. I've heard, all different kinds of stories. There's some testimonials on the site as well.
Yeah, like I was saying at the very beginning, energetic blockages are super, super powerful in a negative way, in the sense that they can really wreak havoc on an organ or on the bodily systems as a whole. And so it's certainly not a surprise to me at all, or to those that have a comprehension of the body, that a cancer concern can be mitigated or, perhaps healed or perhaps helped or assisted via an energetic and stimulating practice that kind of gets the different bodily systems rejuvenated. And especially when we get into the emotional side of experiencing self-love, because we know deep shame and fear or guilt or negative emotions about ourselves can absolutely contribute to a cancer instance, but also can reverse or heal it when those things are healed. And that really is a great kind of inclusion as we wrap up here, because we're not just talking about having sexual pleasure. We're not just talking about having enjoyment. We're not just talking about temporary feelings of fun or whatever. We're talking about health.
Yeah.
And when we allow things to kind of fester and we allow negative emotions to, especially towards ourselves, to just be that lasting kind of visitor within our bodies, we allow our body to, and we program and code our body to be in such a state of disharmony our body will listen to what our mind tells it to do. And if our mind is telling our body, hey, I don't like you, or I'm ashamed of you, or something is going on with you and I don't like it, and you know, something's going on, or you ignore it and you neglect it, or whatever, then it can cause a lot of damage in a really lasting and powerful way, on the physical side of things. That's, you know, you're going to have to pay the piper eventually. You're going to have to address these concerns in one way or another. So you can do the hard work of addressing them up front and doing that healing up front, or you could let it sit and allow those problems to compound until the body just can't take it anymore and it comes screaming out with something like a cancerous tumor or other sort of bodily system failure. But
Yeah.
there's no getting around these conversations. There's no getting around addressing these kind of matters within ourselves. It's just part of life.
Yeah, I think our bodies have infinite wisdom, and we spend most of our time judging them, yelling at them, feeling like we're not getting it right in terms of our body and our body's awareness, whether it's an ailment or we think we're out of shape or we think we're not eating the proper diet or what have you, or we get, a diagnosis, which is what happened to me a year ago, April. I got a pre-cancer diagnosis, and I basically said to myself in that moment, I'm going to choose something different. And I basically started asking questions again from access consciousness, like what's it going to take? And I gathered all my arts, my tools, my techniques, and I believe I changed that diagnosis. Like it no longer exists. And I attribute that to caress, to access consciousness, to some dietary choices. Like, I think we can be empowered by listening and communing with our bodies rather than defaulting to a judgment, a conclusion, a diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. When we try to kind of label things that are going on and kind of paint ourselves into those boxes, we do a lot of damage on the mental side of things, which then, like I was saying, in turn creates issues in the body as well. And so, Sarah Jane, if someone loves everything that you've said today, or most of what you said, or anything that you've said today, and they would like to work with you in whether it's the group sessions or a personal coaching capacity, can you please let our audience know where can they check out more of your content? Do you have the socials? Mention your website. Where can someone continue this exploration of your work?
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, so if you'd like to learn more about Caress, there's caressed.me. So CARRESSED.ME. That's my Caress website. Or ladybugcalendar.com will give you a broader sense of all the things I'm offering. And then I also offer an ongoing performance piece, thelivingblog.net, or I've mentioned many times, Access Consciousness. You can find me on that site as a facilitator as well.
Awesome.
I'm not so active on social media, but you can find Sara Jane Wellock on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. But I'm just not so active there.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes that's for the better, isn't it? And so, Sarah Jane, we've touched on a variety of topics, all within the umbrella of course, health and sexual health and self-exploration and what have you. But is there any particular element to what we've already talked about or that you'd like to toss in here at the end that you'd really like to emphasize for our listeners and viewers to kind of walk away with?
Yeah, I guess starting with, again, even if it's just if you find you're on your phone a lot and you require a bit of a massage of your wrists or maybe a head roll, Yeah, because we're often just looking over the computer or looking at our phones, starting there, or starting with noticing the breath. Is your breath on the surface, or has it deepened? Or just, you could even start with noticing your surroundings. There's an idea called orienting, just looking around and noticing what you're seeing. Like, it can be that basic, and that can be a contribution. And then if you'd like to take a deeper dive, perhaps touch of other body parts or touch of your genitals or joining a caress class, I promise we're gentle like the ladybug.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic message. So thank you for it, because it really just falls under the umbrella of conscious existence as a whole. If we're not observing our own bodies and what's going on and what's aching and what's paining and why are we having these aches and why are we having these pains and how can we work to not only alleviate them now but lessen them into the future and heal them into the future, our bodies are only going to get worse and worse and in more pain and in more pain. And you know, it's really easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of life of I got to do this or I have to do that, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go there. But like I was saying, you have to pay the piper eventually. And if you're not going to give the energy throughout your day, every day, to maintaining your body, at least at a working level of breath and pains and aches and stretching and relaxing and alleviating, it's only going to build up until we, you know, see all of these chronic health problems developing in the aging population. And it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. There's so many preventable issues that can be avoided through a conscious existence. And it starts with the absolute basics, such as being aware of your breathing, being aware of when your body needs a stretch, needs a massage in any of the areas. So thank you very much for that avocation right at the end. And Sara Jane, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's truly a joy and a pleasure, and I really enjoyed getting to know you better and looking at your other podcasts, and I'm supporting you, cheerleading you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll be sure to send you your cheerleader uniform after we get off this. Join the team. Thank you very much, Sara Jane. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
A big thank you goes out to Sara Jane for coming on the show. You know, this is a very important topic because although someone might feel shy about it, our sexual health and wellness is so quintessential for our overall well-being and wellness because, like we were mentioning in the episode, sexual energy is so inherent and present in our bodies, and our sexual organs are very much critical components to the rest of our physical bodies. Similarly, the sexual energy that we have within us, whether we are male or female, is a very strong driving force and interacts with all of our other energies that we have in our body. And, you know, I find most people don't even really comprehend the surface level of their own anatomy or their own sexual feelings or urges or hormones. You know, it's very sad, the state of people's lack of comprehension of their own gender even. So I enjoy connecting with people like Sara Jane that are destigmatizing in a healthy way sexual exploration for health purposes. Obviously, there's a lot of degeneracy today, and people that focus on sexuality in any way very much get lumped in with a lot of the degenerate behavior. But I don't get that vibe at all from Sara Jane and what she's up to. It seems like it's genuinely a very wholesome space and a very wholesome practice that she leads. So be sure to check her out. Links to her assorted websites are in the description. And Some of the contacts that she had mentioned but couldn't quite remember at the time of the episode are also in the description. As always, check out ZachTheHealthKing.com to see everything else that I'm up to. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so you get notified when I post a new episode. Drop a comment. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Did you agree with anything? Did you disagree with anything? Let us know what you thought. You're listening to the Health King's Court. Ancient wisdom, modern health.